Hi everybody, welcome and thanks for joining my new YouTube channel. I'm going to be doing some chats here and there, maybe answering some questions and doing conversations with you guys. Talk about things that interest me most as a bodybuilder who's been in the scene for over 40 years. I'm currently in my mid-50s, started at the age of 15, first competition at 18 in 1988, and have competed on and off through the 1980s, 1990s, and 2010s. Took a break from competing in the 2000s, but never stopped training. Something I've done consistently ever since I first started seriously, probably around 17 when I went to my first real gym and started getting really serious about things. I like to talk to you guys a lot about what I've seen in the industry, how things have changed and developed, good and bad. It's really going to be all my opinion. I'm going to talk mostly about, training, maybe diet, nutrition, the stars of different eras, and other topics that I'm sure you're interested to know about. We'll get into a bit too. But I really want to be kind of taking a kind of retrospective look to see, where things have come from, where they're going, the things I see as good and bad. Again, just my opinions, but I came up in the late 1980s. As I say, I was very passionate about bodybuilding at the time. That was an era in the United States where I grew up, where you could turn on ABC Sports and see the Mr. Olympia or Mr. Universe contest, things like that. That was quite a different era than things are today. Obviously, there was no social media back then, so it was magazines and the occasional TV shows. ESPN at the time worked with a sub-network called ASN, or American Sports Network, that had a TV show called American Muscle Magazine. I was fortunate enough to work on that show for a bit. I did writing for some shows. I interviewed Sean Ray when he was working towards his Mr. Olympia journey in 1991. I also interviewed and worked with Penny Price, who is probably one of my favorite bodybuilders from that era. Not only because she looked amazing, still looks amazing, but she's a really, really nice person. It was fun to work with. That experience, those networks, those TV productions, were unique to that era. I mean, you can't really turn on ESPN today and see bodybuilding shows presented like any other sport. And you're certainly not going to find it on a major network like we did back then. But of that era, I mean, it was really, really special, obviously, for that. You could really look at bodybuilders back then as being like your heroes. I saw, one of the first bodybuilders I saw on TV was Barry DeMay. He's still around, still see him on Instagram and social media. Amazing physique, incredible poser, really, really great shape. There's not many like him anymore. Just an amazing package, especially in that era. There's something about the bodybuilders that era and the way they connected with that era itself. I mean, that was late 1980s, so things were kind of bubbly. We had, the concerns of the United States versus the Soviet Union kind of dissipating because of the fall of the Berlin Wall. There's a lot of hope and stuff, kind of, lots of pastel colors and Duran Duran music and white Lamborghini Countaches and things like that. That was the kind of brightness we saw of the era. And people like Barry DeMay and others fit in that era beautifully. We also had, of course, the legendary Lee Haney, who went on to become an 8-time Mr. Olympia, was in his prime at that time. Lee, I still think, is one of the best bodybuilders ever to walk this earth and one of my favorite Mr. Olympias. He's not the biggest and most overwhelming, but he had a fantastic physique. I mean, the man had, obviously, his proportions were insane. Tiny waist, wide shoulders, fantastic back. All his muscle bellies were super full without being too much. I obviously got to express a little bias here about that era of bodybuilding compared to today's because that's where I came from, but I do prefer the physiques back then. I think Lee Haney was an example of all that was great about bodybuilding back then. I mean, he could pose too, on top of it all. Talking about posing of that era, you can't forget about Lee Labrada, an amazing poser, not a big man, as many people know. Jokes were made about, Some people called him Lee the Flea or something like that, which I think was undeserved, but also I'm sure he took it in good nature. I mean, he knew how good he was. We knew how good he was. His body itself, his physique was incredible, perfectly balanced, always in shape, just incredible. And his posing is just something you want to sit down and watch. You really don't have that much today. We have a few people who do like to pose, but not like that anymore, unfortunately. I don't know if it's just a matter of it's no longer a priority, mixed with being much bigger. It's difficult to pose. I mean, I have been bodybuilding and stepped on stage in the high 170s up into the high 190s, and that 20 pounds does make a difference. For the guys today who are a lot bigger, stepping on stage at 250, it's going to be that much harder. So maybe there's an advantage to being a little smaller, like the bodybuilders of yesteryear, like Lee Labrada. But just amazing to watch. There's a lot of great poses back then. People like Muhammad Makawi also is another great poser back then. Of course, the legendary Bob Paris, one of the best bodybuilders of that era, in my opinion. Just a fantastic, incredible look as a bodybuilder, and great looking guy too. Obviously, he kind of evoked the image of Steve Reeves from yesteryear with a bit more muscle on his frame. Really an incredible bodybuilder and all around, pretty good guy from my interactions with him online. We also had, of course, that era, the legendary Rich Gaspari. Some people know him now only because of the supplement company, but he was a phenomenal bodybuilder back in the day, and he was the one who brought crazy conditioning to stage first. For me, it was looking at his pictures in Muscle and Fitness magazine, and later Flex. There was no Flex in the early days, just Muscle and Fitness. Seeing that kind of grainy, super hard physique, seeing how hard he trained. It was really kind of taking things up another level. He was not as aesthetic as some of the guys he competed with, so he had to, work on his advantages, his strengths, which I think every bodybuilder should do. You look at what you're good at, and dial that up to 10. Get that perfect. For him, it was conditioning, hardness, all those kind of things that he could be the best at. And he did bring that to the stage, and he and Haney had quite a few contests on stage, back and forth. Rich never got the Mr. Olympia away from Lee. I mean, it was very tough to do until Lee basically decided to step down and gave the throne, so to speak, over to Dorian Yates, and a completely different era of bodybuilding started then. But the Rich Gaspari days, the Lee Labrada days, Bob Paris, Barry DeMay, Mike Christian, also a great competitor from those days. It was a really unique place. You would turn on the TV, like I said, and see these guys, and it was very real. But at the same time, they were more like stars than today's bodybuilders, in my opinion. Maybe that's because social media kind of commodifies things a little bit, makes it seem less like a star than it was back then, when you saw them only on TV or in magazines with this incredible presentation that the magazines and the Weider publication would work on. But for me, it was really, really inspiring. I was only a late teenager, 16, 17, 18 years old. And for me, I would read the magazines in my high school during lunch break or during free periods, and just fantasize about being a great bodybuilder. It seemed like everything was possible back then. You may know from the era too, talk about possibilities and what it was like. It was much, much harder to turn pro back in those days. Not to take anything away from today's pros, but when you came from an era back then, we had greats like Matt Mendenhall and Rory Liedlmeyer, who, you look them up if you don't know who they are. Their physiques were just insane, but they never turned pro. Today, they would have turned pro fairly easily, I think. There were only a handful of opportunities every year to turn pro, and the competition for it was really tight. So maybe that made turning pro a bit more dreamy at the time, like something to really aspire to, because it was really quite difficult to do, and it wasn't just something like a feather to add to your cap like it can be treated now. You see some people on social media who work to get their pro card, and it's really done just so they can drum up business, and sell out training programs too, or whatever. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's coaching and stuff. That's what I do. My approach may be a little bit different. I'm trying to talk about decades of experience and share my knowledge, as opposed to leveraging a title or a label to get clients. But that's just how it goes nowadays. That's what people do. But back then, a pro was really something special. They got weeder contracts. They would have to compete a certain amount of times per year by that contract, and they got paid for that contract, basically salaried. They have to do a certain amount of magazine appearances and personal appearances as part of that contract. Those kind of things don't exist anymore. Even during the Ronnie Coleman and Jay Cutler era, there's still some contracts, still some contracting going between the weeders, but more and more so with the big supplement companies because of the money and the revenue that a famous face could bring in for those companies. Again, nothing wrong with that, just different. I think that the way things were back in the old days, there's bad sides to it too, of course, there's downsides, but the way it was presented, that it was, this kind of, this whole world you could aspire to. Of course it was a manufactured image. The weeders worked hard to make it look superlative in every way because that would help them move product from magazines to supplements. And I get that. I understand. But there was a kind of purity to it. There was this idea that it was something you could aspire to. You wanted to become part of it. Someday, if I work hard, I can get there. And there is that now too, but I don't know. I think, someday getting 1 million followers on Instagram, aspiring to that as opposed to being on the front page of Muscle and Fitness or Flex and being in the, all the bookstores and the supermarkets and whatnot, your face there in an incredibly well shot photograph that you don't really see much today by some greats of the time. That definitely motivated me and my colleagues, my peers at the time. Those who competed in the 1980s and early 90s. I'll talk about competition a little bit later, but I'll probably talk a little bit about training if I can, if you guys don't mind. Training was a little bit different back then. Most of us trained much the same way, I think. There was obviously some experimentation with heavy duty. Mike Menser was around in the 1970s, wrote some books which I read as a preteen, early teenager. Which I found some sense in, but almost all of us train like the Arnold way, like 5 to 6 days a week, relatively high volume, pyramiding sets so that you started out with a lighter weight and lots of reps and went to a heavier weight with low reps. That worked. It was safe because you gradually worked your way up, so avoiding injuries and getting your body ready for higher weights. There was a lot of volume in it. 20 sets per body part per workout was not uncommon back then. But if you were working out every day of the week, then you could spread it out. We didn't do bro splits as far as I know back then. That kind of started in the 2000s, I think. In those days, it would, it might be like a 3-way split or a 4-way split. For me, I remember training a lot like Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, taking off Wednesday, and mostly having the weekends to myself. Some guys did like the 3 on, 2 off, 4 on, 1 off, whatever worked for them recovery wise. But there was, more sets, more volume, less emphasis on being really, really strong. Of course, we did push a lot of weight back then. When I was 20, 21, I was pretty strong. I was, I got up to 7+ plates and deep squats. I was bench pressing, 425 for reps on the inclines. Just build a good thick chest, and good legs, the squats that I mentioned earlier. But not without some risk of injury, of course. But there wasn't the all-out drive for strength that we see today. And I think that, both systems have their pros and cons. But what I remember about training in those days, especially in the gym with other bodybuilders, was really fun. Of course, it was aggressive when you were in your set, but it was more of like a brotherhood feeling, somehow like you're doing a lot of pump sets and stuff, and you're getting a lot of blood in the muscle, and you're feeling yourself getting jacked up, and your friends are doing the same. There's this kind of jovial feeling in the air, as opposed to going all out, like we do nowadays. And I'm not saying that's wrong, because that's what I do now. I train much heavier style. Heavy is relative, as I can talk about some other time, but more focus on heavy progression now. Back then it was just train a lot was basically what we did. And then you train more. If you needed more muscle, you would just train more. And try to eat as much as you could, appropriately, and whatever else you needed to support, your aspirations, your career. But training was, when I went to the gym, there was always a bunch of people there that I was really happy to see. We became friends in and out of the gym, did activities in and out of the gym. In my area, Massachusetts, we had this thing. We had a state park, and there was a big tug of war every year, and the gyms would show up with all the guys from the gym and have a big tug of war contest and barbecue cookouts and stuff like that. I don't think that really happens much anymore. Maybe it's because we're more spread out because of social media. It's not like as tightly knit as it used to be, just by the nature of the business. But that feeling I do kind of miss sometimes. It may also have been just a factor of the times. In the late 1980s, 1990s, they were a different era than they are now. Things have changed, people have changed, the way we view things have changed. Neither's better or worse. Again, I say this is just my opinion, but that's how I felt at the time. That's how I feel about it today. But yeah, the training back then, you'd always work in with somebody. Your buddies would come by and, what are you training today? I'm training this, and you just train together. Basically you default to one of the other guys' routines and just push each other, motivate each other. It was common to have, a couple training partners. Either rotate through them or all of you training together. Up to 3 guys you could manage pretty well, with a lot of support and pretty fast pace. Back then, we definitely because of the higher volume, we would spend more time on the exercises, which gave you kind of an opportunity to have the chit chats in between sets and stuff, because you had so much volume. You need to take a break now and then, so have a quick chat and some brotherly type motivational talk here and there. But that was the biggest difference for me. It was not just the training style, but I guess the camaraderie in the gym. I feel like things are more competitive now, and maybe that's just the nature of the beast, because everybody's competing for eyeballs on social media and the associated potential revenue with that, I guess, either through sponsors or direct selling programs and whatnot. That's just the way it is, which is fine. Nothing wrong with that, but just it's different, and I kind of preferred it back then. I can't turn the clock back and go back to that, but it's nice in today's gym. I train really hard, but I usually have a smile on my face, so I think I'm kind of approachable in between sets at least, and I do try to build that the atmosphere as best I can, contribute to it, so that people feel like it's fun to see your brothers in iron, I suppose you say, in the gym. Women too, of course. We should all be friends with each other and all supportive, all across the board, from the inexperienced to the very experienced, men, women, boys, girls, whatever you want to say. We all are in it for the same thing, basically. We want to improve ourselves and see how far we can go. So it's great to support each other in those kind of things. We all had, as I mentioned, like I mentioned earlier, like Arnold's type program. We'd follow the kind of pyramiding set. And that's probably what it was. We all would watch the what we could, not just from people in the gym, but occasionally there'd be like a training videotape, VHS tapes released before DVDs. I remember watching stuff from Lee Haney and others. Lee Haney particularly had the idea of to stimulate and not annihilate. He said all the time, like, work hard but don't bury yourself. I think that's wise advice. Some people may say, like, Haney could say that because he had incredible genetics. He didn't have to push that hard, I guess, to grow. I mean, there are some people who, for them that works, they don't have to go nuts. We all know some pros, or even some people around us who are like that, who don't need to go to the absolute limit, to go failure beyond failure, to grow. And for people who do need more, I think that's where the later training methods came in. Way Dorian Yates adapted Mike Mentzer's training programs, which is originally Arthur Jones from Nautilus fame, where people who didn't have superior genetics needed a little bit of extra. And I think those training programs, focusing on failure, going beyond failure, maximal effort with more emphasis on recovery, became more helpful in later eras. And that's probably because of the greater influx of actually bodybuilders competing. In the 1980s, 1990s, the field was relatively small. Nowadays, it's massive. So the more people you have coming in, you're going to get more people, I guess, with gifted genetics. But you're also going to have more people with average or below average genetics, and they need different ways to train, diet and whatnot. And so, these kind of modern techniques, which I follow now and I can talk about later, where you're going to failure, beyond failure, rest, pause, focusing on recovery. These things have become more important as the genetic pool of who's training and trying to get big and trying to compete grows. But I don't think quite as fun as it was back then. It's more goal oriented, and feels like a task sometimes, as opposed to just going to the gym and enjoying yourself. But at the same time, like, you can reap greater rewards perhaps by being more focused and having a plan and being very progressive. And there's definitely something to be said about accomplishing your goals and reaching new highs. So that's definitely something we should be doing. Another thing that changed, of course, a lot of people are probably aware of, is diet, nutrition. In the 1980s and 1990s, it was all about moderate protein, high carbohydrates, and like zero fat. Gaspari is obviously one who pushed that. And I don't think it's a bad idea. It doesn't work for everybody. It worked at the time. Personally, when I dieted for contests, I had a difficulty getting really hard, and I didn't learn I needed to drop carbs until much later in life. When I competed again in the mid-1990s, I did Dan Duquesne's Body Opus diet, which is kind of a cyclical ketogenic diet where you go very low carbs all week and then load one day on the weekends. And that worked well for me. I didn't know that kind of system would work for me in the 1980s and early 90s, and nobody was doing it. We were all just trying to cut as much fat out as possible, especially contest time. It got so much that one of the things that kind of went around the bro lore was you'd eat like skinless chicken breasts. Of course, those were a favorite and still are. Yeah. What we used to do is get the chicken breast skinless and poke it with a fork or knife as many times as you could, and then boil it, because then theoretically you would get the intramuscular fat out of the muscle tissue, which made it that much lower in fat. Of course, that's a bit extreme, and it led to very dry chicken. But that's the way it was back then. It was really about low fat, high protein, and higher carbohydrate. There was the idea back then, again, Gaspari, I think, espoused this, eating extra carbs was what they call protein sparing. And there might be some logic to that. There is some research out there that says, obviously if you're under feeding carbohydrates, your body has to look for other energy and will, turn the protein essentially into glucose. I won't go into that, but, basically most people watching this probably know that that's possible, and it does happen. And if you have, more fuel in the form of the most preferable fuel, which is carbohydrate for the body, then the body will use that and leave the other nutrients alone to do what they do best. The protein can be used for tissue building, fats also for supporting those kind of systems, although the fats were, of course, minimal back then. There was more emphasis on clean carbohydrates and vegetables. I remember brown rice was always the thing. We ate lots of brown rice back then. Nowadays, most of us, including myself, find white rice, while maybe not as nutritionally dense, is easier to digest, especially when looking at today's world of very high intake diets. When you're eating a lot of food, it has to be something that's easily processed. So things that have a lot of fiber, like brown rice as opposed to white rice, fell into disfavor probably sometime in the 2010s when people started getting really big after Dorian Yates came out there. But back in the late 1980s and early 1990s, it was like a basically healthy diet with a high focus of protein, more than the regular person would have. And that was it. It was nothing really crazy. You'd eat like 4 to 6 times a day. Didn't have a lot of shakes because shakes were just nasty back then. I remember late 1980s, it was like things just started to get going in the shake area. Before that, it was like Weeder shakes, which tasted, literally like sawdust mixed up. It was never suspended properly, never really broke down in solution, whether it was water or milk. It was pretty nasty. But I remember shortly after, I think it was Champion Nutrition came out with like Metabolol 2, which were pretty good. Dan Duquesne came out with his whey proteins, and things just kind of ramped up pretty quickly after that. And things got better and better and better. And of course, they sold more products, so they were motivated to do so, to work on taste and mixability and stuff. And that really changed. But back then, before that, it was a lot of cans of tuna, a lot of chicken breasts, Really lean meats if you ate red meat, fish, white fish especially, lower fat. You ate your vegetables, your brown rice, some oatmeal, cream of wheat. I used to like to eat a lot too. There's usually some fruits sprinkled in there. I mean, it was, like I say, it looked like a basic healthy diet of the time with more emphasis on protein. Nothing really would be shocking to people. And the volume of food wasn't shocking then either. I think most of us are probably max out around 3,500 calories a day, maybe 4,000 if you're really big, like someone like Lee Haney at the time might be doing 4,000 off season. It wasn't until a bit later when some of the bigger bodybuilders came out that it became kind of in vogue to say you were eating thousands and thousands of calories a day. But before that, it wasn't really a thing. But things changed. 1990s came along. Dorian Yates took the Olympia title from Lee Haney, who stepped down. And, it became about getting more size, being as massive as you could and as hard as you could be. And it really did change like how we trained, how we ate, and all those kind of things. And again, nothing wrong with it, but, there were changes. One of the changes I probably regret most, not from a competitor's point of view, because it's quite hard, but from a spectator's point of view, was the emphasis on posing. Watching people's routines back in the older days was an experience in itself. Everybody had to pose properly, or you were marked down on it. And then that kind of went away, emphasis on size and hardness came in. And it became essentially a different sport. And, unless you were really into freaks, which some of us are, and that's cool, I am sometimes too, it wasn't as much fun to watch. So that was a bit missed. Although that's kind of coming back a little bit. We did have greats like Cedric McMillan, who's a very good poser, and there's a few other people who can pose well, even at the extreme sizes we see. So that's always nice to see. But, it's a little different. And man, I could talk about this stuff for a long, long time. Let me know in the comments if this is the kind of stuff you want to hear about, like kind of reminiscing or waxing poetic about the old days versus the current days. I've competed in the 1980s, 1990s, and 2010s. I've done a lot of different things, tried different things, seen different things, learned a lot, still learning today. Always trying to pass on that information, which is why I'm doing this YouTube channel and why I have my website, cmtphysiques.com, where I try to help people with online or in-person training. In person, you're going to have to be here in Japan, the Tokyo area, for me to help you out. But, I'd love to do that if we have the opportunity. At this point in my life, there's nothing more rewarding than passing on information and seeing people succeed. And that's what I really want to do, whatever form I can do that in. And even just the entertainment aspect, like these videos here, just sharing my thoughts and memories with people. That's a lot of fun for me. I like to do it. You can also see some of my writings about this online at professionalmuscle.com. I'm on there as a username Hawkmoon. I've been around for a long time. Not afraid to share that history. But you'll find I'm waxing poetic a lot, looking back, reminiscing. And if you want to hear more of that on here, let me know. If you want to hear more about current experiences, let me know. I'll also talk about that. I'll talk about my competitions in the 80s and the 90s, the 2010s, what was different, what I learned, what to do, what not to do, different aspects about training, different aspects about nutrition, different aspects about supplements and super supplements, what's changed in those areas. I like to be able to share that too. And everything I'm going to say, of course, is just my opinion. You can take it or leave it. But, I think I've done okay. I mean, I have maybe slightly better than average genetics to grow muscle, maybe average to get hard. And I've done okay. And hey, I'm 55 in a few months and I'm still here. I'm still healthy. So I must be doing something right. Had a few injuries along the way, but those are not really related to training, more, kind of foolishness. I could talk about those too. But, having come this far, like I say, the experiences I've had, I'd like to share as much as I can. So, as I say, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, please. If you want to hear more, subscribe, and I'll take that as a signal that you guys want to hear more. Drop some stuff in the comments about what you want to hear more about, and I'll try to do that and share that. Again, really a pleasure to be able to share. So yeah, check out the videos on this channel. Check out my site, cmtphysiques.com. You'll find what I offer there.